Hello, everyone, and welcome today to the session, Self-Learning AI. And we're going to talk about how to use AI or artificial intelligence in a very proactive approach to redefine enterprise security and strategically the way we can think about the applications of cybersecurity powered by AI and augmenting our security teams. My name is Mariana Pereira. I'm the Director of Email Security Products here at DARKTRACE. And what I want us to do is, of course, a lot of the stories that you might have heard me present do start with an email, and such will be the case also with one threat story I will share with you today. But what we need to be thinking about is a bigger picture and a bigger conversation about how artificial intelligence can be used to proactively secure and respond in real time to threats. And we can only do this if we understand the business and then allow that AI, once it's understood the business, to empower that artificial intelligence to take decisions autonomously and decide how best to respond to an emerging or an evolving threat. Automating processes that are repeatedly bogging down your security team and augmenting that team so that it's more powerful and more performing. So how we've done this? Well, for some of you who don't know DARKTRACE, we are an AI company, and we've taken best-in-class technology and analysts, and we've been around for a while, went public this year. DARKTRACE actually counts more than 5,000 customers globally in every industry. We are widely distributed. We have offices all around the world. Of course, now we have home offices also all around the world. And essentially our R&D center, which is headquartered in Cambridge, we have over 30 PhDs and mathematicians who are experts at the practical productizing of the artificial intelligence so that we users don't need to be mathematicians or PhD holders. Now, a lot of stats here on this slide, but essentially what I want to summarize is that AI-enabled attacks are already here. We see this in different components and different bits of technology that we have seen in attacks in the wild. And attackers are augmenting and automating the attack lifecycle. And those attacks are being supercharged by automation, which means that the attackers themselves have more time to concentrate on thinking through the strategy. How are they going to get into your business and let the machine take care of the repetitive, tedious tasks? So in practice, what could that look like? Well, I like to think about what it would be like for an email marketing campaign when marketing executives are looking at segmenting the target audience, thinking what's the best message, what's the best copy, what's the best call to action. And then those messages are sent en masse with targets for those subsegments, and sometimes they're also personalized. That same automation technique and that same technology that allows marketers to enhance their campaigns is also available to attackers who can supercharge email marketing campaigns, phishing and spear phishing campaigns. And once those emails have gone through and gotten a foothold into the business, the attackers can also use AI to understand how best to navigate that ecosystem. Now they can pivot and move laterally to a new environment on the first day, or they can lie in wait. We will see an example of this sort of slow attack in just a couple of slides. So we have both ends of the spectrum here. We have those devastating ransomware attacks that very, very quickly cause havoc once that foothold is established, all the way through to attackers that lie dormant for months or years. And it is very difficult for human analysts to piece together the activities and understand on a big picture and over a long period of time that those activities are part of the same attack. So with attackers using artificial intelligence, we also have to shift the defense side in terms of how do we think about embracing AI to enable also the changes that we've had to make in our workplaces so that workers can work more securely. So we've shifted our work, we've shifted the way that we work in the last year and a half, and people are working on brand new architectures and in new systems with security teams that were designed for old systems and old way of thinking. So there's no putting that genie back in the bottle. Hybrid work, which was already the reality for many of us, is here to stay. And so what happens is that the attack surface in those companies has changed massively. And there are more areas that are exposed to the internet, exposed to new users than our companies have ever had before. And of course, the attackers have adapted to take advantage of this. Now, as we're thinking also about all of the different criteria and competing priorities really for a business, of course, operational success, sales operations, logistics, go-to-market, all of those are always at odds with security, right? And I think that that's really clear when we think of it in a factory setting or in the case of national critical infrastructure, where the operational demand that requires machines, requires companies to be always on, always delivering, is directly at odds with the principles of safety, which requires frequent shutdowns, frequent checks, and slow moving operations. So alongside this requirement for that operational continuity, the security sometimes is seen as a hindrance or as a secondary thought. And what I'd like to challenge you to think of is actually the two can live together. As long as you have 100% and real-time visibility on all of those ecosystems and how they are changing over time, that's the power of self-learning AI that can keep pace with those changes. And that also means changing the structure of your business. So I mentioned before that the attack surfaces are expanding. Well, what does that mean for a business or a security team? It means that very quickly you need to be able to adapt and think about the security and the practical considerations of the data that is now in those new silos. As we've seen over the past year, ransomware has been the flavor of the month. However, nation-state attacks are also increasing and, in a way, becoming an accepted norm of global conflict. And regardless of the intentions, whether it's for espionage, targeting vaccine research, it changes how we see and how we think and how we have been thinking about critical infrastructure. So the backdrop is changing, and you need policies to adapt and change with them because the attack is dynamic as well. So it's a dynamic attacker against a dynamic set of landscapes and situations. Of course, you need that ability of the AI to adapt with all of these changes. So what I want to share with you now is a real world case study. This is an attack that was identified by DARKTRACE as artificial intelligence, but more importantly, thanks to the fact that our AI is able to self-learn and adapt with the evolution of the attacker. So at every stage, when the attack changed or pivoted or tried something different, the AI was right there to understand that that was the next stage of the attack and be able to use that autonomous response to enforce the normal pattern of life of the business and make sure that the business continues operating as it should. So I've already mentioned, of course, the rise of remote collaboration and SaaS platforms. Obviously, here I'm thinking about Google Workspaces or Microsoft 365. The use of all of these platforms and collaboration technologies has surged. And while there are obvious benefits, the downside is that we have expanded the attack surface. We are stretching the security team, and we're also presenting our security team with having to manage environments that they might not have been familiar with before. In this case, what we have seen is an increase, also almost a fourfold increase in vendor email compromise, this large amount of cloud-based attacks that are targeting the vendors directly, as well as very large increases, of course, in phishing and email compromise attacks of all sorts. So once the attacker has gained access to a business, often they can do this with multiple accounts if multiple emails have gotten through on the same domain, that enables them to attack from multiple angles that same business. And then this gives the attacker an opportunity to pivot through those SaaS environments as well as bringing in external payloads. So let's see this in action. Here we have an organization that has over 5,000 devices in its environment and 1,000 SaaS accounts. That to me also says, quite frankly, that they have about 1,000 users scattered God knows where in the world. And it doesn't really matter. What's important here is this timeline where we can see the threat actor starts by leveraging account A, but over time, it will actually exploit and leverage 5 different accounts from 5 different users. The actor initially compromised these two initial accounts. We're going to refer to them as account A and account B, presumably using actually a VPN. And what DARKTRACE detected was that we saw some very unusual logins for these SaaS accounts. In account A, the attacker was observed previewing files, and these files were likely containing information about the company's customers, but there were no other actions done. There was no copying, there was no movement of the files themselves, just an access. But in account B, they set up a new inbox rule 3 hours after that initial compromise, which then resulted in a high severity alert, just the creation of that rule. And around that same time, the actor had sent a number of phishing emails from account B, emails that appeared to be sharing harmless and legitimate folder on OneDrive. The link probably led to a fake Microsoft login page where the recipient of that login page would have not been able to tell the difference and would have put in their credentials, believing it to be a legitimate login page, thereby handing the credentials over to the attacker. This phishing attempt was actually detected by Antigena Email, or DARKTRACE for Email, which is our email security technology. And here we had the AI in passive mode, which means that it was configured to alert, but not actually respond. So it wasn't allowed to respond, even though we can see clearly that even though the account was having some very highly anomalous sender search and coupled with these unusual logins from unusual locations, the AI would have actually intercepted all of these emails and reduced the impact of the attack. However, it wasn't allowed to take this response, so the attack continued. The attacker was actually subsequently locked out of account B, and they tried and failed to use a legacy agent to bypass the multi-factor authentication, which was likely actually being enforced on this account. So DARKTRACE detected this as a suspicious login, and actually we were able to block that attempt. But the plot thickens. The very next day, the actor actually logged into a new account, an account they hadn't logged into before. We're going to call this one account C. And it was using the same autonomous system number, ASN, and it's an indicator that the account had also been infected by that OneDrive phishing email that we had seen be sent via the link from account B. So in other words, the attackers, having leveraged account B to compromise new users in this organization, meant that there were multiple points of intrusion. Account C was used to preview a file, again, likely to contain contact information. And then 2 more accounts also were found. The hacker was able to find their way into 2 more accounts, D and E, which were also hijacked thanks to the previous phishing attempt. Essentially, what happens is that we can see it here, the failed login and failed lockouts. Every time that the attacker was then thwarted, they attempted something different, something new. And running out of options, the attackers then decided to go back to account A and set a new inbox rule there. DARKTRACE again recognized this as highly unusual behavior, and the attacker was promptly locked out of that account as well, therefore closing the door to this attack from being able to proceed. Now, this was quite a complex attack, not because of the technology involved, but just because of the number of accounts that involved. And legacy tools just aren't able to keep up with this kind of attacks because they're still looking at each account in isolation. They're still thinking in terms of good versus bad, in terms of allowing certain behaviors on certain accounts to occur, but they're not able to get a big picture understanding of the company as a whole, of all of the workforce, of all of the workers' interactions between different systems, even between a SaaS environment and your on-premise environment, if you have that kind of distinction. And essentially, this legacy approach, which is based on the idea that you can wall or fence your infrastructure and keep the bad guys out, just doesn't work. And of course, so what you need is, I think, more openness. Let's bring down the walls. Let's allow for our businesses to open, to act in an open and collaborative way, which is, by the way, exactly how our workers are working. And to be able to embrace this and do so securely, you need AI. You need AI to understand those subtler threats, to understand those very small indicators of anomalies or malicious intent, and then be able to correlate those at scale and in real time. Now, of course, every man and his dog now says that they can do artificial intelligence, and most of these statements come from marketing departments and not the tech team. And so this has led to some confusion. So it's important to distinguish what we mean when we are talking about real self-learning AI. And the key difference between the legacy approaches and AI is that artificial intelligence is self-learning, and not once, but over time. It needs to continuously learn. Legacy approaches, in fact, instead are retrospective, and they're looking at indicators of past attacks. So even when machine learning or artificial intelligence is used in parts, it is used on training data based on historic attacks. And that means that it's very good at spotting things that are like that thing that happened before, but it fails against the new attacks or new evolutions even of the same attack. So that doesn't work. It doesn't catch the novel, it doesn't catch the zero-day stuff, and it fails to keep pace with those changes of environment that we know all too well are the hallmark of working in the world we live today. So DARKTRACE instead looks at self-learning AI. That means it learns on the job, and it will continue to learn a sense of self of the organization and understand the DNA of the company. What this means, it's much like the human immune system. It understands what it is part of self, what is part of that ecosystem of your business. And no two businesses are alike. So we can't train an AI on anyone else's business but yours, and have it understand what makes your business unique, how your workers work, how your workers interact with your customers, with your suppliers, with your partners. And because we cannot predict threats, and there has been, and we know that there will be, an even greater rise in machine speed attacks and AI-powered attacks, this is where we think about how do we balance business innovation with achieving cybersecure workforce. That means embracing the right technologies, and that means embracing artificial intelligence, where we have been able to create this remedy in the form of the immune system for the business. And as I was saying, just like the human immune system, that is that internal innate security for our bodies that looks at what manages to get in past the skin, you need a digital immune system that will catch those indicators of threat, that will understand when something gets into your ecosystem. And thankfully, AI is actually really good at dealing with uncertainties, and it's constantly recalculating on the basis of new evidence, on the basis of new events, and that means that it's able to adapt and evolve. So what does this mean? It means that the AI is learning on your business and not from the threats. And that means that it's very good at understanding how your business is supposed to run. And when there is an attack, or when there is something that looks a little bit anomalous or a little bit off, it means that the AI can step in to enforce what it has learned to be the normal functioning of your business. And this is that autonomous response technology. That's the power for the AI to fight back autonomously against those fast-moving attacks. Now, don't get me wrong, I am using autonomously here quite deliberately, because automatic is a rule. You can set up a rule, you can create a set of parameters under which something is triggered. Autonomous response is much more subtle and much more complex than that, as it takes the AI, the capability to truly understand how to intervene, causing the least amount of disruption possible, a very surgical response. We launched this capability 4 years ago, and today over 1,000 of our customers rely on our autonomous response technology, Antigena, on a daily basis to fight back against attacks. And as I said, what is really critical is that surgical interruption without bringing down or without disrupting or impacting the rest of the business in any way. So in the example of a ransomware attack, Antigena would stop the malware from making connections to a specific file share, but the device itself is still operating. The worker can still work on that device as they normally would and not be disrupted. And of course, it's also configurable. The human is always in control. So it can be turned on 24/7, or just maybe when your team isn't present, such as at nights or weekends. And just before I move on, there are actually three Antigena modules currently available, which allows you to have the AI respond and protect different areas of your infrastructure: cloud, network, and email. Now, talking about response, let's just go back to that threat story for a moment. Multi-account compromises are generally incredibly persistent threat and also very difficult for traditional security tools to identify. And that's because hackers will use several techniques and several accounts to circumvent the security systems. And that means, for instance, in the initial use of those two compromised credentials, which were account A and B, with having access account A but not doing anything, the hacker was able to stay under the radar and not raise too much suspicion on that account. And essentially only had to revert back to account A once all of the other accounts and all of the other activities had been compromised and they had no other options. So the activity that was generated for multiple ASNs were actually pointing to at least 3 different geographical locations, probably using a VPN. One in Africa, where much of the organization's activity originates, 2 in North America, and also some widely used ASNs, which were unusual for this customer, especially these 2 North American ones. So the attacker used Microsoft services right up until that final emails and was choosing to live off the land. They were using what was available to them, gathering the intelligence that they had readily available and choosing to pivot and continue their attacks based on the intelligence that they gathered. Being able to spot and connect that all of those different stages of the attack are part of the same attack is also very difficult for human security teams alone, because you need either the same person to have insights and connect those dots, or for your team to be very good at communicating with each other, especially when this happens over a long period of time. And so to help, what DARKTRACE has done, and because the AI is so good at looking at large amounts of data and putting it all together, is that when DARKTRACE identified every stage of the attack, it launched an automatic in-depth investigation across the entire infrastructure and was able to present this report and the findings to the human analysts. So here what we have is a cyber AI analyst working hand in glove with human analysts to speed up that investigation process. Essentially, what this means is that the humans are getting to meaning. They understand much, much faster what the problem is, what the AI has done, and what kind of next steps that they might want to choose to take. Let me tell you a little bit about the technology behind this, because I think it's worth our time. So we analyzed DARKTRACE's own analysts in our 3 SOC teams. We have 24/7 coverage in 3 SOCs around the world. And we learned from our analysts how they were using our AI to investigate threats. And with 3 years of learning, essentially we've taught the AI to mimic that human expertise. And that means that we've now been able to bring this to your fingertips. You essentially have the top of the DARKTRACE analysts investigating threats in an automatic way, which will present to you all of the findings and all of the incidents that are related to an event or to a breach in an easy to understand report. So as threats become increasingly sophisticated and our cybersecurity industry continues to face skills shortage, overworked and under-resourced teams, the augmentation that is brought by cyber AI analysts reduces triage time by 90%, which means that they're not having to do that busy work, that repetitive looking up logs and trying to figure out what's happened. What we are enabling them to do is to get to the meaning and get to the real crux of the incident a lot faster. So the cyber AI analyst is continuously examining every security event that arises and trying to figure out, in the same way that a human analyst would do, where did I see this? Is it related to something else? And it is constantly doing that question process for autonomous triaging and reporting. And so the technology combines the best of both worlds, the human analyst intuition together with the consistency and speed and scalability of the technology that powers our artificial intelligence. It illuminates those highest points of threats once so that you can focus on those, and basically allows you to then figure out, how am I going to respond to these? Do I need to change my business? Do I need to be rethinking the way that we are running our digital ecosystem? And these incident reports are actually scripted in a very easy to understand language for both technical and non-technical audiences, available also in various languages. So I do encourage you to have a look. The reports are also quite easy, and I find them interesting to read because they synthesize the entire attack lifecycle, and they will also show you all of the users, the credentials, the devices that were involved. And it contextualizes that threat in a really simple way. So with that, I would like to thank you for joining us today. I wanted to just share a couple of last thoughts here on the screen from quotes from other DARKTRACE customers. You would have seen the quote from PPS earlier today. As I mentioned, we have customers all around the world who use AI in very specific methods for their companies, trying to address those pain points and the priorities that they themselves see. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all. The AI needs to be truly self-learning to be able to then adapt to your needs and your business challenges. With that, thank you very much for participating. And if you have any questions, please reach out and get in contact.